Welcome back to Staying in My Lane podcast. I honestly don't even know where to start or what to say. Usually, I have a lot to say. I process things out loud. I talk through things. I research everything. I question everything. I take something that happened to me at 9 a.m. in the morning, and by 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I've connected it to childhood trauma, attachment styles, generational cycles, or even the food that we eat and how that red dye 40 is affecting my child. Because that is just how I am. I'm very into everything and I like to process things out loud. But this time I got quiet and I didn't feel like recording anything. Honestly, I haven't even felt like talking to anybody either. I isolated from my friends. I tried to deal with everything on my own. And honestly, I think that's because for the first time in a really long time, I was not trying to turn everything into this whole what I was experiencing. Here's a lesson for you, while I was still actively bleeding from the pain or the things that I've been through. Figuratively, right? Not realistically. Although considering everything my body has been through this year, I'd probably need to clarify that. I thought about that after I said that. But seriously, I needed to live. I wanted to sit with some uncomfortable things that I was dealing with in my own space and with my own time. I needed to work on my marriage. It's still a work in progress. Being a mom in motherhood, still a work in progress. Healing from things that happened a long time ago, again, still a work in progress. If we're going to be honest, it's really easy to have a podcast about healing when you're talking about everything everybody else did to you. It's a lot harder when healing starts showing you the things that you did too. And that's where I think I've been. I've been in this really strange season where I feel like God has been stripping me from so much of the noise. And when I say noise, I mean opinions and that loud in between other people's opinions, my own overthinking, the constant need to explain myself, the need to defend myself, the need to make sure everybody understands my intentions, clarifying every comment that I make, the need to fix every uncomfortable conversation, the need to even chase people when their energy changes, the need to ask, "Are you mad at me?" 1,000 times over and over again. Just ask my mother and my mother in law. No, I'm serious about that. But you know what I'm talking about. Analyzing a text message 47 different ways, the hyper awareness of everybody around you, their face changes, meaning they're smiling or not, their voice changed, the tone of their voice just fluctuated even the tiniest bit. They put a period at the end of a text message when they normally don't. They put a thumbs up. That really annoys me, by the way. Now, suddenly, your nervous system is holding an emergency board meeting. What did we do? Who did we offend? Should we apologize? Should we send a paragraph? No. We should probably put the phone down. And that's something I've had to learn. Not every shift requires a reaction. Not every silence requires me to fill it. Not every misunderstanding requires a 17-paragraph explanation. I'm really guilty of that one. And not everybody needs access to every part of my life. This one has been huge for me because I am an oversharer with things that I've been through. Obviously, I have a podcast. However, I think there's a difference between vulnerability and constantly handing people information about your life. And I want to clarify, I don't do that as much as I thought I do. I'm very selective in what I share. When you're desperately trying to feel understood or heard, you do that. And I didn't realize how often I was doing that. For example, I would feel hurt and I would immediately feel the need to explain or defend myself. I would feel misunderstood and immediately want to explain why I felt misunderstood. Someone would form an opinion about me and I would practically build a PowerPoint presentation, not literally though, but here's why I'm actually a good person. And I would list the reasons why. But then I started thinking, why am I doing that? And the answer is uncomfortable because somewhere along the line, along my journey, I learned that being misunderstood felt dangerous. If somebody was upset with me, my body didn't interpret that as they're upset. My body interpreted as fix it now. And I've learned through my own healing journey that that was not peace. That was not me wanting to just be calm. That was my nervous system living in survival mode. And lately, I've been asking myself a really difficult question. What if I just don't fix it? Okay, what if somebody misunderstands me? What if somebody doesn't like me? What if somebody thinks I'm dramatic or rude or whatever? What if somebody thinks I've changed? What if somebody creates an entire version of me in their head that I don't even recognize? What happens? Here's what I'm realizing with that. I still wake up. Nothing happens. My kids still need me. My husband still needs me. And I still need me. And of course, there's laundry piling up and multiplying, even though I swear I just did a load of laundry. The laundry is still there, and it still needs me too. Life keeps moving. And I think that I've spent years, and I don't know if anybody can relate to this, believing that I had to fight for myself to be in a place where people viewed me as a certain type of person. I had to prove my heart, prove my intentions, prove that I was trying, prove that I was healing, prove that I wasn't the person that they thought I was. And the truth is that I'm tired of doing that. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm not resentful or angry about the things that have happened. But I don't feel this huge need to fight anymore. I don't have this urge to prove anything or seek any approval from anybody. I'm just content living in my own little bubble, if you will, and realizing that I am enough within my own heart and within my own soul. I don't need outside approval to find that self-worth and fill that space of feeling like I wasn't enough. And that's a huge change for me from going to wanting to have every conversation, wanting to prove my point, call my mom, call my mother in law, call my husband, call whoever the hell it is, and just explain myself like, hey, this is the reason why I feel this way. This is why I did this. This is what A, B, C, E, D, whatever it is. I don't feel the need to do that anymore. I don't have to have the conversation. I don't need the closure from every person. I don't need everybody to admit what they did to me if they were in the wrong. And I also don't need to pretend I haven't made mistakes because I have. I've reacted instead of responded. I've pushed conversations when somebody's asked for space. I've over explained. I've involved people in situations that probably should have stayed private. And I've spoken from hurt. I've said things I regret. I've allowed my nervous system to run the show and then wonder why everything fell apart or felt chaotic. And that's on me, that's on nobody else. That doesn't mean that I haven't been victimized in certain situations. Again, those certain situations of being a victim to circumstances does not define who I am. It does not excuse the behavior that I've chosen in certain situations, those reactions, instead of responding with logic and reason instead of feelings and emotions. We could all build our identities around things that have happened to us, but I refuse to do that. I have children watching me. Sometimes I say things out loud like, who authorized this? Why am I acting this way? But then I remember that they're watching how I handle conflict. They're watching how I handle healing. They're watching how I speak to myself. They're watching what I tolerate, who I tolerate. They're watching how I apologize, whether I take accountability. They're watching whether I chase people who don't want to be chased. They're watching what marriage looks like. They're watching what boundaries look like. And I have to stop there because since I've stopped sharing things in my relationships, outside of my relationships, since I've stopped seeking that approval or finding answers to every little thing, my relationships have gotten better. They've strengthened a lot. My boundaries have become stronger and more black and white versus kind of that gray area. They're watching what faith looks like when it isn't pretty, when life is not pretty, because my faith has been tested. I'm just going to say that. There have been moments where I've prayed and thought, God, where are you? And then I've had to ask myself, have I actually been waiting on God, or have I been praying and then immediately trying to handle the outcome myself? Because I do that all the time. God, I give this to you. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, okay, where is it? What's going on? And I know I need to work on that. My patience is very short sometimes. But I think this season is teaching me to surrender in a way that I've never understood before. Surrender is not doing nothing. Surrender is understanding that not everything is mine to control. Other people's opinions, not mine. Other people's choices, not mine. Whether someone loves me the way I want them to, not mine. Whether someone sees my growth, not mine. My actions, mine. My words, mine. My relationship with other people and God, mine. The mother I choose to be, the woman I'm becoming, the wife I'm choosing to be, all mine. And I think that's why I'm coming back to this podcast differently, because I don't want this to be a place where I pretend I have everything figured out. And I've never pretended before, but I don't have anything figured out, not even close. I want this to be a place where we can say, you know what, I was hurt, and also I hurt people. I have trauma, and also I'm responsible for my healing, and I've also caused trauma. I love my family, and also, hold up, I need boundaries. And also, marriage can be really, really hard, but I believe in my marriage. Sometimes I have questions. Two things can exist at once. And I think social media has completely destroyed our ability to understand nuance. Everybody needs a villain. Everybody needs a hero. Everybody needs to pick a side. But real life is not a 60-second TikTok. Real marriages aren't. Real motherhood is not. Healing? Nope. Sometimes you're the person who was hurt, but sometimes you're the person that has also caused hurt. Sometimes you're waiting on that apology, but sometimes you need to be the person to apologize. And that's the uncomfortable truth. So if you're sitting here listening and you're in a season where you feel like you're losing people, or you're asking for doors to be shut, whether you're questioning relationships, realizing that you've spent years trying to earn someone's approval or love, whether you're exhausted from explaining yourself, or maybe you start to recognize patterns in yourself that you don't like, welcome to the podcast. You're probably in the right place, because that's what we're talking about now. The uncomfortable side of healing, not the pretty, glamorous one that we see on social media. The side where you realize that boundaries aren't just rules for everybody else, it's self-protection. The side where you realize being triggered doesn't automatically mean the other person is wrong. You have to look at yourself. The side where you learn to sit with discomfort without immediately reacting to it. That one's a hard one. The side where you stop asking everybody else who you are and you're confident within yourself. The side where you're quiet enough to hear during the silence. The side where we stop begging, stop forcing, stop asking, stop chasing. And instead we start paying attention. Sometimes the biggest change in your life doesn't happen when you finally find the perfect words. I've been quiet, but I haven't been gone. I've been living, learning, messing up, praying, trying again, and becoming painfully aware of the fact that healing is not nearly as aesthetic as the internet makes it out to be. Let's think of some examples. Healing can look like crying in your car instead of yelling at somebody, not sending the text message even though you really want to. Sometimes it looks like apologizing without adding, but you did this. Sometimes it looks like letting somebody walk away. Sometimes it's staying and doing the work, looking and realizing that you have absolutely no idea what's next, but you're going to go anyways. I think I'm finally starting to understand what the name of my own podcast actually means. Maybe staying in my lane isn't ignoring what's happening around me. Maybe it's finally understanding what's mine to carry and what's not. I'm back, and we have a lot to talk about. And when I say I've been living through things, I mean I've been living through it. I had twins, premature twins at that, an emergency C-section after a uterine rupture and 2 placental abruptions, spending a month in the NICU, and then having 2 babies connected to monitors for that whole month. I learned an entirely new language because I had no other choice. And then I came home and it was like, hey, here you go. I think sometimes people assume that when you come home from the NICU, the traumatic part is over, but it's not. There's no nurse standing at the doorway or teaching you how to do anything. There's no nurse reassuring you that the numbers on the monitor look good. It's up to you. There's nobody coming to save you in a few hours. At 2 a.m, staring at your babies, wondering if they're breathing normally. I mean, I had an owlet monitor for both, and I still do, for both babies. And I literally up until probably a couple weeks ago, would just panic and like stare at the monitor and watch everything because I was scared and I was very on edge and my body was in fight or flight. While I was becoming a mom to two more babies, I was still a mom to three other children with their own needs and their own emotions, their own experiences that they're also healing from. And I think that's something that people forget about moms is that life doesn't stop because you almost died. The dishes don't look at you and say, wow, she's been through enough today. Nope, it's still there. The laundry, it doesn't say, you know what, there's a uterine rupture and a C-section. We'll give her some time off. Your children don't stop needing emotional regulation because your nervous system is completely shot. You still have to show up. And I was trying really hard to show up. But if I'm being completely transparent, I don't know that I always knew how to. I also ignored text messages from friends who tried really hard to reach out to me, to check in on me, but I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. I didn't know what to say. And all while that was going on, I learned that someone I thought was my best friend had completely backstabbed me, lied to me, and abandoned me during a time of need because she was too upset that I was pregnant. She was too upset that I was making things about me. Let that sink in for a second. While I was going through a near-death experience, she was too upset to be my friend. While all of that was happening, my marriage was even struggling. And I mean, struggling because we were living in two separate spaces. He was working and I was in a hospital. And there have been moments in that time period where we both said things that we didn't mean. We felt unwanted, blamed each other, and wondered if our marriage was going to survive because I felt completely isolated and lonely. And that's the part I don't think people expect me to say. Being in the NICU, having a traumatic birth, having kids at home who have their own high needs and need us to be parents, present parents, not just parents, present active parents who regulate themselves and can be present in their own feelings and in their own way. Having the twins in the hospital, dealing with postpartum, also dealing with a loss of a friend myself that I just talked about. And I didn't know how to reach out to anybody. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond. And I lashed out at my husband. I lashed out at my mother-in-law, my mom, my kids, and I cried a lot. I can tell you every hurtful thing that's somebody has ever said to me. I remember words, every single word. I remember the tone of their voice. I remember their facial expressions. I remember what room we were standing in, the time of day. I could probably tell you the exact time, to be honest. But healing has forced me to ask, do you remember what they said after that? Do you remember pushing the conversation and causing a problem too? Do you remember following somebody who asked for space because your body was screaming that if you let them walk away, they'll never come back? Do you remember sending the paragraph messages to family members in hopes that they'll understand you or that they'll just bow down to what you need in that moment? Do you remember calling somebody else because you needed validation immediately in that moment and then freaking out on them and threatening them and crying because you felt abandoned? Do you remember trying to solve years-long relationships in one conversation at midnight when everybody was exhausted and angry? I do. And that realization has been brutal. Something else I didn't talk about is postpartum. I pushed this conversation down so much because I didn't want to talk about the hormones and the anger and the exhaustion and the hormonal shifts of dysregulation with my emotions. I thought that if I went to bed and just ignored it, that it would go away. I used to think that fighting for relationships meant that you never let the conversation end until it's resolved. I thought if we went to bed angry, something terrible would happen. I thought that space meant abandonment. I thought silence meant rejection. And that's a big one because when people don't respond to me, well, sorry, let me rephrase that. When people would not respond to me in the past, I would take that or think that that was rejection. But that's not what I think anymore. I was just using that as a reference. So when somebody said, I need space, my nervous system heard, you're losing me. And I would push and push and push. Talk to me. Tell me what's wrong. What do you need? Do you love me? Are we okay? Well, and then I would even be mean. What's going to happen now? Can we fix this? Just tell me what to do. And I called that communication. I don't know why, but I did. And I'm not saying that all of this is who I am now. I'm simply saying this is where I've grown from. Sometimes it wasn't communication. Sometimes it was panic. That doesn't erase the things that have hurt me. It doesn't make cruel words okay to say back to the person. It doesn't mean that every problem in my marriage or in my life belongs to me. But I'm finally mature enough to admit that I have my own fears that have sometimes created the exact environment that I was afraid of. So it's basically kind of self-sabotaging. I was so afraid of disconnection that I chased connection until there was no room left to breathe. There was no chance to have a connection because I was forcing it and chasing it so hard that it was almost running in the opposite direction. Sit with that for a minute because I'm sure you can relate at one point in your life. And then there was family. If you've listened to this podcast, you know family has been a very complicated subject for me. I've spent years trying to figure out where I belong, who is safe, who isn't, what's a boundary, what's control, when do you forgive, when do you walk away, when do you stop explaining. And I have involved people in my life because I desperately wanted someone to say, Lindsay, I understand you. But I was doing it from a place of what I needed and what I expected them to do and how to react to me based on what I respond to, not the way that they communicate for themselves. And that was selfish. I can admit that. I have been selfish in the way that I want people to respond to me because it makes me feel validated or has made me feel validated. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Because I think so often as humans, we seek validation or seek approval or seek clarification in ways that work for us. And sometimes those ways that work for us might not work for other people. And sometimes that can cause problems. And it did for me. Not because it was wrong, but because I was creating a problem. And I can admit that now. I was creating a problem. Here's what I learned when you share too much or when you try to process things too quickly, right? However, sometimes you process things or you need to process things after the smoke clears. Wait, sit with it. Because when you invite too many people or voices in your life, eventually you can't hear your own. And for me, I couldn't hear anything. Everybody had an opinion. I was laying in bed in the middle of the night, just replaying conversations in my head. Stay, leave, forgive, don't forgive, cut them off, give another chance. You're the problem. They're the problem. You're traumatized. They're toxic. You're triggered. And I remember thinking, does anybody actually know what's happening anymore? Do I even know what's happening? I held on to things so tightly, and I'm trying not to do that anymore, but I say I hold on to things so tightly because there are things I hold on to that I think it consumes who I am as a person sometimes. And I think more so in the past, but because we have become obsessed with finding answers or needing validation or labeling people. One uncomfortable conversation and somebody's a narcissist, or somebody needs space because they're avoidant. Somebody cries and they're manipulating you. Somebody gets angry and now they're abusive. Somebody sets a boundary and now they're controlling. It's so easy to twist a situation or misinterpret a situation. And those things can be true, but they can also be untrue. My point is that we sometimes overreact And it gets us into these situations where we are consumed by everything. Sometimes we're trying too hard to force things instead of naturally letting them flow. Sometimes we overanalyze and we overexplain. Sometimes we try too hard. Sometimes we need to let space sit, having that time of no talking, having that silence to process instead of forcing a conversation. And I'm definitely talking to myself on that one because I've been a serial paragraph sender, if you will, because I used to try to explain myself to every person. Here is why I feel this way. Here is a PowerPoint presentation over my entire identity and every emotion that I hold, which seems pretty silly now. But then I had this epiphany with this whole situation. What if my nervous system is trying to protect me from a fire that isn't actually happening to me right now? And that question that I asked myself changed everything. I had a chance to stop what I was doing, toxic behaviors, things that were having negative impacts on my life and other people's lives as well. And I had to accept that I cannot bubble wrap myself, my children. I can't prove everything and solve every problem. I think when I finally realized that this is not a chapter that I have to rush through, so I can finally be the woman that I want to be right now in this moment, I think that this is it. Maybe the woman that I'm supposed to be isn't waiting for me at the end of healing. Maybe she's being built right here in it, in the middle of everything. And I think that's what I've been dealing with. Not a big dramatic change, everything all at once. A traumatic birth, the NICU, postpartum, all 5 children needing different versions of me, a marriage that's supposed to be pushed to places that I never wanted it to go, having to confront a lot of hard truths and work on things that I never thought that I would have to work on because in different parts of my life, I didn't know that I was toxic. Family relationships changing, friendships ending, friendships rebuilding, my body changing, my faith being challenged, my own patterns becoming impossible to ignore. And for the first time, I didn't want to immediately come on here and tell you what I learned because I hadn't learned it yet and I haven't learned it yet. I'm still in it. But I think there's value in me talking in the middle of things, not pretending I know how the story ends, not packaging my pain into a pretty quote, not turning every breakdown into 5 things that trauma taught me. Sometimes the most truthful thing you can say is, I'm going through it and I'm paying attention. I'm taking accountability for what belongs to me, and I'm giving back what doesn't. I'm not the same woman I was 6 months ago, but I can promise you that I'm a woman who's going to be honest about what she's been through, and we're going to sit with this. And I hope that you guys can find some healing in this as well. And I hope that I can make a positive impact because that's what this whole podcast has always been about. I don't want to keep abandoning myself or changing who I am or wanting to seek approval just to make sure that everybody stays in my life and that everybody understands me. There's a reason for a season and a season for a reason. And I say that all the time. So, we are just getting started with this new-ish conversation in the podcast. But I can promise you there's a lot more positivity, healing, the hard conversations where we're going to talk about things that are hard to talk about and about things that honestly sometimes can be embarrassing to talk about. But we have to start taking accountability and owning up to what our part has played into a situation. And also working on healing and letting go of parts, situations, scenarios that other people have played in our lives that have hurt us, that have taught us a lesson. And honestly, let it go. Let it go. I don't think that this season of my life is about getting everybody back. I don't think this season of the podcast is going to be clean cut and tied with a bow. Maybe It's not about repairing every relationship. Maybe it's not about finally finding the perfect words that make someone understand who we are as people. Maybe this season is about finally understanding ourselves. I personally have spent so much time of my life watching everybody else, reading the room, watching faces, listening to tone of voice, feeling the energy shifting, wondering who's upset with me, who's leaving, who's thinking I need to do something, what I need to fix. And somewhere in all of that, I stopped watching my own life. I stopped asking myself what I needed. And I don't want to live that way anymore. I don't want to beg for a place in anyone's life. I don't want to chase conversations that aren't ready to happen. I don't want to explain my heart to people committed to misunderstanding me. But I also don't want to use healing as an excuse to never look in the mirror. Some of the doors that closed have caused me hurt, and it's been hard to work through that. And some of the doors I've closed have closed because I kept bringing chaos into the room. And, that's accountability. That's growth. That's healing. Real healing is not standing on the other side of your pain, pointing at everybody else who hurt you. Real healing is being brave enough to turn around and look at yourself, deciding whether you want to stay that person. And I personally don't. And if this relates to you at all, if you feel like you can relate to this podcast episode, keep following for more. I'm starting to understand that peace isn't something that somebody else gives you. It's something that you have to find within yourself. I'm not coming back telling you how to heal or telling you that I know how to do it myself. I'm coming back so we can figure out what healing actually looks like. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast episode, and I will see you next time.